Okay, so today we're going to be doing a video where I'm gonna try to pitch you books that didn't really work for me. Okay, so what I mean is these are books that I didn't necessarily hate, but I didn't really like that much. Well, no, that's not fair either. These are books that I didn't necessarily hate. It's just that I didn't love them. Therefore, I don't really talk about them that much on my channel. However, I don't think that they are bad books, and I do think that I didn't like them for preference reasons, so you should still check them out maybe. So I'd like to recommend them to you, and maybe you'll find something that you like. I'm gonna kick it off with two books that I have talked about recently on my channel because I have read them recently, and they're very popular series that didn't fully fit for me, but I still think that potentially a lot of people will like them. And then we'll get into books that I haven't talked about in quite a while that I still think should maybe be recommended, even though they wouldn't be recommended by me for my taste. Okay, we're gonna start off with the series that I just finished reading, and I think this video is gonna come out before my review of the final book in the series, but it's the Rising Trilogy. I just finished Morning Star. There will be a review out soon. I personally didn't care for the first book in the Rising Trilogy, and then book 2 I enjoyed, and book 3 I enjoyed. After reading the whole trilogy, I'm still not crazy about the series. I enjoyed reading it. I buddy read it with my friend Dylan, and that was so much fun because I love chatting with him. But the series itself isn't really for me. However, the series is intensely loved on BookTube. Intensely loved. I enjoyed it. I had a good time reading it. Books 2 and 3 were good. But it's just, I don't love it on the level that everybody else seems to. This is an adult sci-fi book. It's one of those books that I think fits really cleanly in both YA and adult, although it's a lot more gruesome and graphic and horrifying at times than most YA tends to be, which is probably why it is marketed as adult. Especially book 3, man. There was one scene that really got me. But anyway, this is an incredibly fast-paced trilogy. Barely any breathing room at all. I mean, there are constant twists. Anytime there is a moment of breathing, the author throws another twist at us. I mean, it's non-stop movement, excitement, and it's like a roller coaster, honestly, to read this trilogy, which is the main reason why I didn't fully get attached to it. I really like breathing room in my books. I really like a moment to just sit with our characters and get to know them a little bit better. And don't get me wrong, the plot in this trilogy is great. It's fast-paced, it's wild, it's tons of fun. It's also horrifying and not fun at all at times. But it's just a lot for me. I just like to slow down a lot more than this trilogy allows me to do. But if you're wanting a fast-paced, intense ride that is tons of fun and also pulls on your heartstrings a lot in the kind of things that these characters have to face off against, and you constantly want to be on your toes, I think this is worth checking out. The next one that I'm going to talk about that I have talked about recently on my channel, and it's the last one that I've already talked about fairly recently, and that's the book of the Ancestor trilogy. I recently reviewed all 3 of these books on my channel as well. The first book is Red Sister. And again, I enjoyed the series. By the time I got to the end, I was happy I read it. I read it with friends. It was a good time. It's a well-written series. It just didn't fully work for me. However, let me tell you why it might work for you. Okay, so we follow Nona, who is an orphan girl who goes off to a school to train these girls up to be assassin nuns. It's a brutal world. It's a dark world. We start with Nona when she's 10, I believe, and we grow up with her through, I think, into like young adulthood up till she's probably 18, 19, somewhere in that age range. We also follow her with her friends, as well as her teachers who are assassin nuns and who are, some of them are fantastic characters. This trilogy has amazing friendships, great character dynamics, and again, a very interesting twisty-turny plot. There were things that made it not work for me, primarily time jumps, where a lot of very important things would happen off page, and I just constantly felt like I was trying to catch up with what the author was doing. It's like, oh, there's a relationship here now. Oh, that person is in this really important position now. Just really important things would happen off page, and it's just like, I just have to accept that I'm not seeing a lot of things. Deaths would happen off page for characters that I would really like to, I'd like to get more from something very dramatic that happened to them. You know what I mean? It was just, there was a lot of stuff that I felt like I was playing catch up because of the amount of time jumps we had in the series, which made it a little bit harder for me to feel fully immersed in it. And I'd say that that's probably my main complaint looking back at the whole thing, but incredible character relationships happen in this trilogy. Amazing character growth from book 1 all the way out to book 3. And again, a very interesting, twisty-turny, wild ride of a plot. I would say that both Red Rising and Red Sister are more plot-based trilogies. Red Sister is called Book of the Ancestor trilogy. Are more plot-based than I need out of my books, but Red Sister is closer to my preference because it's still very great character dynamics and a main character that I got really attached to. Anyway, I think both are worth looking into, even though they didn't fully fit for me. Next, we have Wild Beauty, a book that I haven't talked on my channel about in about 3 years. Wild Beauty is a magical realism about a group of women who work to tend a garden, but they're magical women. I don't really remember a lot about the context, but they work in this garden, and it's an incredibly environmental book. It's it's like you're stepping into the garden, and the work that they do with these flowers is very visual and very, like, you feel it, you experience it with them, which I actually think I'm more likely to like now than I was back then, because I'm much more of an environmental reader now, but I do remember the prose being quite flowery, which isn't my taste. Anyway, these women have some sort of enchantment on them where any time they fall in love, the person that they fall in love with disappears from existence. And so because of that, they kind of just have a kinship amongst themselves and don't ever extend beyond their group. Until a boy shows up in their garden and ta-da! He's in danger because of the curse, because their main character is maybe probably going to fall in love with him. At the time, it was way too environmental, way too flowery, way too immersive for me. Now I love immersion, so I might try it again someday. Still doesn't really sound like a plot that interests me that much, but if you are one of those readers that adores just stepping into a book and the environment of the book is the main component of the book, if that's your jam, check this one out. The Book Thief. I won't spend too much time on this. You've heard of it. It's a historical fiction. It's another book that's very slow paced, very slow moving. It should have worked for me by all accounts. It just didn't. And I think the main reason is because Death is telling the story and Death is spoiling the story. He tells you from the start that something's going to happen, and then we experience the story and then it happens at the end. And for some reason, that just made me really detached. I guess it put up my guard and made me not allow myself to get fully invested in what was happening because I knew what was coming and I didn't want to hurt. I don't know. It was a storytelling technique that worked for a lot of people and didn't fully work for me. But it's a very emotional story. It's a very character-focused story, so it should have worked for me. It's very beautifully written, painfully, heartbreakingly told. And I definitely think that people should still look into it, even though it didn't fully fit for me. Once and Future Witches. I lied. I recently reviewed this on my channel. This is a story about 3 sisters who are witches, and they live in a world, in a setting where witches are believed in, but generally chased away, and witchcraft is banished from this world. These three sisters are facing a lot of oppression. This is set during the women's suffrage movement, and so these women are facing a lot of resistance in their personal lives, as well as the magic of this world kind of is a stand-in for all the things that they're facing against in a social sense. And while they're fighting for this social justice for themselves, they're also fighting to bring witching back. Excellent family relationships, excellent dynamics between these three sisters, what they've been through, what they work through together, and what they bond over. Very environmental, broad brush strokes, vague, soft magic system that you feel more than you see, if that makes sense. Every time it's described, it feels like you're stepping into the magic as opposed to getting a full grasp on the magic. You know what it tastes like, you know what it smells like, you know what it does, but you don't necessarily understand the rules of it. As well as really great social commentary. Really well done book. There were things that didn't make it work fully for me, but excellent execution, and I could definitely see people adoring it. In fact, I know people adored it because it was a buddy read from my Patreon, and a lot of people liked it. A lot of people felt the same way as me. It was kind of a mixed thing, but the people that loved it really, really hard. The Starless Sea. So, the Starless Sea, do I remember the plot of this? It follows a boy who, I believe he steps through doorways and he enters a lot of different worlds, but at the same time, he has this one core place that ties him to the world. It was such a beautiful book. It was so environmental, and there are a lot of stories within the stories, and some of those stories within the story I loved so hard. There was one about keys that I was obsessed with. It was one of those books where I loved the world so much, but in the end, I had kind of mixed feelings about it because the character work was so shallow to me. And so when big things were happening at the end, I felt totally detached to the plot and the characters and the things that were happening to the characters because all the focus of the book was on this world, which I loved. I was obsessed with the world. But then when we got down to everything coming to a head at the end, I was like, I don't really care. He could die. I don't know him. Which isn't really what you want, but man, that world was built up well. And the stories that we got to have, it was really good. Shadow of What Was Lost. This is a book that a lot of people compared to Mistborn. In fact, I believe the author said that he read Mistborn and thought, I could do something like that, and then he wrote this book. So if you like Sanderson, if you like Mistborn, check this out. My brother loves this trilogy. I picked it up because of him. He said I would for sure love it because I love Sanderson, and I just didn't love it on the level of Sanderson. Now, I realized in editing that I didn't give a proper description for this book, and that doesn't seem fair to the book, so I'm just going to real quick add one right here. This is kind of like your standard hero's journey setup. Boy in a small town finds out he's the chosen one of sorts, and then goes on a journey, goes on a quest. But it does a good job of being its own story with that setup. We follow Davin, who needs to learn to control the gift, but he's really struggling with his lessons, and there's going to be great consequences if he can't control them. He then discovers that he has the ability to wield a forbidden power, which is all I'll say about it. And after a terrible event that happens, he ends up going on that journey that I mentioned before. I think that it is a really interesting plot and a really interesting setup, and I think that what the author did to take this structure that we know and making it really unique, I think he did a great job with it. And even though there were things that made this book not work for me, I think that the plot itself was very, very strong. It's really well done. The world is interesting. The magic is interesting. The characters are what failed me. It's mostly just because I never felt like I knew these characters on any depth level, and a lot of times horrendous things would happen to them and they kind of wouldn't even react, or they would react in the moment and then immediately forget about it and it wouldn't follow them And that was hard for me as such a character reader. That was really hard for me. So I actually thought this book was quite good, and in the end, my review for it was generally positive. There were just some key things that didn't work out for me that held me back from feeling any need to continue. I probably would have liked the trilogy just fine if I had finished it out like I did with Book of the Ancestor and the Rising Trilogy. I'm glad I think I would have said, I'm glad I read it. It was a good time. Great, just not really fully for me. And I just didn't feel compelled. I had other books that I was more excited to read. Namely, I wanted to finish Stormlight instead. I think it was Oathbringer. I wanted to read Oathbringer instead. Rhythm of War wasn't out yet. Next book on the list is Wizard of Earthsea. So this is a classic YA fantasy. I think it's before YA was a genre or a category. Anyway, this is a classic fantasy. It follows a boy who goes on a quest. Hey, here we are again. Actually, I'm talking about Wizard of Earthsea and the Neverending Story on this list, and I'm just going to talk about them together because I pretty much have the same things to say about them. This concept of boy has a quest, he goes on a journey to do a thing so that X can happen, but the plot, the reason he's on a journey, the thing he's trying to get, the thing he's trying to accomplish with this journey, these things, they don't really matter that much. You can change them out. You can take them out, put something else in, and the story would say the same because the point of the book is the journey. The point of the book is who we meet along the way, what we learn along the way, and the world that we experience, right? Like you have a beginning and you have an end, but the book is the quest. You know what I mean? The Hobbit, what was that book I just finished? Stardust, and these two books, they all kind of have that formatting, and it's just not a formatting that I tend to care for. But with that said, both of these books, Wizard of Earthsea and The Neverending Story, are good. They're well done. They're well written. They're interesting. The characters and the things that we meet along the way are fascinating and more interesting than the plot itself, than what we're doing itself. So they didn't do anything wrong, and I really think people would like them, and I don't want people not to pick them up because of me. It's just that this general structure it's not my thing. And finally, we're going to end this on The Beauty in Breaking, which is a nonfiction. It is about a woman who is a doctor, and she tells her story of going through multiple sections of doctor. What? She has multiple jobs. She works as an ER doctor. She works in actually, there's a lot of focus on her in the ER, but she works in different areas in the medical field, and this is her talking really brutally honestly about the stuff that she experiences and sees and what's normal for doctors to go through. And it's hard to read. When I read it, I did recommend it for sure. It's just that it's not a book that I'm going to talk about a lot on my channel because I didn't enjoy reading it because it hurt too much to read. I don't have the wherewithal to be in the medical field. I love and appreciate those who are in the medical field. Thank you. But man, that book was hard to read. Specifically the stuff where she focused on treating children. It was tough. I'm glad I read it because there was so much that I had no idea about that doctors go through. And I'm glad I know now. I appreciate them that much more. But man, was it hard to read. But it is a brutally honest and yet very well-written depiction and showing of things that are normal, that really shouldn't be normal, that doctors have to deal with, that doctors do deal with working in the medical field. Stuff like sexual harassment, racism, not reporting things just because it's probably not going to get addressed. Like, man, it was tough to read. I do recommend it, even though it was so hard for me to read, but I guess that's the point. Her brutal honesty was the point. Anyway, here's a list of books that I didn't fully love because of my own preferences, which there's nothing wrong with. I mean, every review is subjective. Everybody likes what they like. Every review is going to have people's preferences in them, right? That's the point of reviews. But because of my preferences, these books didn't fully work for me, but I still think that they're good books, and I'd like to still give them some love, and hopefully, maybe in this list, you found something that you realized, hey, even though Murphy didn't like it, maybe this would be great for me. I'd love to chat with you more about it in the comments. There are affiliate links if you want to check any of these books out. Have you read any of these books? Will you read them now because of hearing about them in this way? I post videos every Tuesday through Friday. I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.